From KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. On air and online, this is Intersection.
Hello and welcome to Intersection, where people and ideas meet online and on KBIA. I'm Ryan Famuliner. Next week, film fans will make their way to Columbia to attend the Citizen Koch Film Festival. The annual event, which takes place this year from October 4th through the 6th, features the work of female filmmakers. One of the filmmakers attending this year will be Tia Lessin. Her documentary Citizen Koch tracks the influence of money in contemporary politics. The film starts with the Citizens United Supreme Court decision of 2010, which removed certain restrictions on corporate political donations. The film then moves on to the recent political showdown in Wisconsin, shortly after Governor Scott Walker pushed a string of conservative reforms, such as curbing collective bargaining rights for public workers. Today on Intersection, we'll talk to the co-director of Citizen Koch and others about the issues her film brings up, the rules surrounding money in politics, the influence that money has, and what it all means for our democracy. Joining me in studio, Paula Elias is the director of the Citizen Koch Film Festival. Paula, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Joining us by phone, Tia Lessin is the co-director of the film Citizen Koch. Tia, thanks for calling in.
Thanks so much for having me.
And joining us by Skype is Richard Reuben. He's a professor in the MU School of Law who specializes in campaign finance law and democracy theory. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
All right. And we'd also love to hear from you and our audience as well. Do you think money plays too big a role in modern politics? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925, or you could email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet at intersectkbia. Okay, so to start off, Tia, we'll talk a lot more about this film, but first off, why did you decide to make this film, Citizen Koch?
Well, I think, everybody in this country was alarmed and stunned by the infusion of cash the last couple of years in the post-Citizens United world of campaign spending. And we wanted to take a look at how that money was impacting, in particular, the citizen recall of Scott Walker, and whether money, big money, would play a role in whether he would, win or lose that recall. So we set out to really document the decision itself, Citizens United, and the impact of that decision.
Okay, and I guess Paula, having seen this film, why did you decide to include it in Citizen Koch this year?
Well, we love Tia. She was our first director of our first opening night ever of Citizen Koch. But I think it's an incredible film, and I think just the way that it approaches such a complex subject, something that's so complicated, and really is able to tell the story and the full breadth of the story in a way that is really understandable and is also engaging from a storytelling point of view. It makes it a remarkable film, and we had to have it.
Right. And Tia, yeah, the point Paul is making there, I mean, this is a really complex issue, right? So how did you go about trying to make that relatable and I guess just consumable in this film?
Well, first of all, we, Carl Deal, my partner in crime here, and I really wanted to, first of all, understand the Citizens United decision. There's a lot of rhetoric about it. There are a lot of bumper sticker slogans. But we wanted to, just really understand what it was, how it came about, and what it meant. And so that's where we begin the film. We try to make it relatable. We tell the story of how it got to the Supreme Court and how the Supreme Court had some ethical conflicts of interest over that decision. And then we take it to the state level to see how it plays a role and how money in politics in general plays a role there in Wisconsin. So that's how we lead you into the story. Hopefully, in the story, we have you meet some of the characters in the film, lifelong Republicans, actually, people who have voted with their party, who are committed to their party, but are really at odds with their Tea Party elected governor, Scott Walker, who has, after he's elected, has gone on an attack against the public employee unions and working people in the state. And we're really interested to see how these people who have felt represented by their party, all of a sudden feel betrayed and decide to take some action.
Right. And And Richard, I wonder your thoughts. As Tia mentioned, one of the starting points of this film is that Citizens United ruling in 2010. Could you tell us a little bit, some background on that, and I guess how that has, if that's changed the political landscape a little bit since 2010 when that was implemented?
Well, there's no question that it has changed the political landscape. The real question, and the question that Tia's film is going to begin to help us answer, is just exactly how. What the Supreme Court did in the Citizens United case, most people have heard, or at least those who are paying attention have heard that the Supreme Court said that basically corporations are like people, and there can't be any restrictions on their campaign financial interests. Well, that's a bit of an overstatement. That's a little overbroad, and so let me just explain what they did by giving you just a little bit of history, and I'll try to keep it tight. In a very big case, the United States Supreme Court upheld the ability of Congress to regulate campaign finance. It was a very important law. This was back in the early 1970s, and it was in response to Watergate and concerns about corruption in government. And in a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, not signed by any individual justice, signed by the court itself, the court upheld the validity of those of that law in substantial part. What I mean by this is this: that the Supreme Court created a distinction between campaign contributions, in other words, money that you or I might actually give to a candidate or their campaign, and what they called independent expenditures. In other words, money that I might spend at a printer to pay for flyers for your campaign, or today money that I might give to a radio station, or pay to a radio station or a TV station to put on ads. And what the Supreme Court told us is that it's okay for Congress to regulate, because it is certainly reasonable to have concerns about corruption in politics. And it's certainly reasonable to have concern about the appearance of corruption in politics. And so that was the first big step, was they upheld the act. But what they said was, when it comes to campaign contributions, that's okay to regulate. But when it comes to independent expenditures, in other words, money that we might spend on our own behalf, out of our own pocket to just help someone's campaign or ballot measure, they said money is speech, and that would be an invalid restraint on political speech. And that's the most precious kind of speech that we have in a democracy, is our ability to speak on political issues. So the Supreme Court, big decision, says you can have limitations on campaign contributions, but you can't have limitations on independent expenditures. Well, what a lot of states did after that, and it actually followed some federal laws. What they did was they said, look, when it comes to corporations, and it includes not just big business, but also labor unions and other associations like that, when it comes to them, they have so much money that we're going to make them pay for their political contributions only out of money that they collect for the purpose of making expenditures. In other words, Exxon Oil can't spend, under this was the thinking in the States, Exxon Oil can't spend the billions of dollars that it makes every year on political contributions or political expenditures. But what they can do is they can form a political action committee, raise money from certain people for that committee, and then use that money to spend on behalf of candidates and ballot measures. And it was that rule, it was that principle that the Supreme Court said they can't do.
Okay. And Tia, I guess, what did your film find in relation to a lot of what we just heard from Robert?
Well, you know, we looked. Wisconsin was one of those states which, after the Citizens United decision, lifted its ban on corporate contributions and really unleashed incredible amount of political spending, mostly to pay for broadcast ads on television and on radio, which I think are largely responsible for the campaign arms race. In a lot of countries, in a lot of European countries, candidates don't have to pay for airtime. They get that for free, and a lot of other countries also limit the amount of time that candidates can actually campaign to 3 weeks in some places, 5 weeks in others. You know, imagine how great that would be. In Wisconsin, after the Citizens United decision, the midterm elections saw the election of Scott Walker in the end of 2010, and his campaign benefited from a huge amount of campaign money that came from third parties, from the Republican Governors Association, which was largely funded by Charles and David Koch, and from corporate PACs and other special interest groups, and a lot of those were out-of-state forces. These were not folks in the state of Wisconsin who were, you know, trying to elect Walker. They were folks from out of state. So we were curious about the impact of that money, and what we realized that Scott Walker's attacks very shortly after his election on labor unions had very little to do with Walker's trying to curb the cost of state spending, and it had a lot more to do with undercutting union clout and neutralizing small dollar donations from working people, which labor unions amass and spend collectively. So we were curious about how this ploy, this maneuver, this strategy, it looked like on the part of Scott Walker and many in the GOP and the extreme right of the GOP, was being deployed, and Wisconsin was a great case study for that. So in other words, the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision unleashed all these corporate donations, and at the same time, super enfranchising the wealthiest, they wanted the wealthiest not only wanted to take advantage of this decision, but also cripple the opponents that were largely funding the Democrats, and that would be labor unions. And so Scott Walker, you know, what we came to understand was that Scott Walker's attacks on the labor movement and on public employee unions was simply a way to undercut the spending of the largest political organizations supporting, doing third-party expenditures on behalf of his opponents, the National Education Association, the Service Employees International Union, and AFSCME, among others.
Okay. I'd like to take a moment to remind our listeners that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're talking about the changing role of money in politics. That's the topic of the documentary Citizen Koch, which is showing at next month's Citizen Jane Film Festival in Columbia. Joining us in studio, Paula Elias is the co-director of the Citizen Jane Film Festival. Joining us by phone, Tia Lessin is the co-director of the film Citizen Koch. And joining us by Skype is Richard Reuben. He's a professor in the MU School of Law. And for you and our audience, what's your opinion of the Citizens United decision? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet at intersectkbia. We'd like to remind you that you can watch Intersection as streaming video online during our live conversations every Monday afternoon at 2 at kbia.org. You can watch that video and join our online chat by going to kbia.org and scrolling down to the link for Intersection. Again, that's Mondays at 2 online at kbia.org. I guess, Richard and Tia, one thing I saw argued in a New York Times editorial talking about the Citizens United decision was the fact that prior to the decision, donors still had ways to, these big donors still had ways to get their money in. It does free things up a little bit, but you could indirectly contribute to a campaign through things like social welfare groups or 527s. Could you talk a little bit about how significant Citizens United is in light of these other paths that still used to exist?
Well, let me go ahead and respond to that by saying that money in politics is a lot like water. It will find a way. And what the Citizens United case did was it made it a lot easier. There were a lot fewer hoops to jump through. And it also created the potential for much larger aggregations of campaign of campaign resources, the so-called super PACs that we saw that were so powerful in the last election. And it was simply because the limitations that were on corporations at the state level, and to a lesser degree at the federal level, simply did not exist anymore. They could use all of the money that they had in their treasury, every last dollar of it, if they wanted to spend on for political purposes. That's what was new.
And Tia, I guess to that same thought, I know a lot of your film focuses on the Koch brothers, but others that are these large funders. Do you think that Citizens United really was the breaking point, or are there other factors at play too?
Well, after Citizens United, as Robert pointed out, a lot of the states followed suit and lifted their long-standing bans on corporate contributions. But not only their bans on corporate contributions, their disclosure requirements for nonprofits and for political donations from corporate interests and from individuals. And so those disclosure requirements might have been actually tightened on the federal level through super PACs, but on the state level, they weren't worth the paper they were written on. I mean, those laws were either revoked or the attorneys generals in those states decided not to enforce them anymore. And so you had states that, one, lifted those bans and had no, either the laws requiring reporting from corporate interests didn't exist, or they weren't really robust enough to deal with the flood of money that was coming in. So I think it really had a major impact. Look, there's a ton of spending out there, and there was a ton of spending, beforehand, and there's certainly ways to hide that spending. But there were many places where voters could easily figure out either immediately or within a few months where that money was flowing from. In today's America, billionaires and corporate interests can very easily hide their money through nonprofits and spend in unlimited fashion. So I think it's pretty much a sea change in from what I gathered, and certainly on the state level.
Okay.
And if I can just follow up on that
Yeah.
briefly, I think T is absolutely right, and it's significant because the Supreme Court is not done. They're going to be hearing a case next week, which is going to be testing the constitutionality of contribution limits. All we've been talking about with Citizens United are limitations or the invalidity of limitations on independent expenditures. The next step is whether Congress can limit whether states can limit political contributions. And the case next month is McCutcheon versus FCC, and it's going to just chip away at that. And I think most people who follow this know that where the Supreme Court really is heading is toward a system of disclosure only. In other words, no regulation and disclosure only. And I think very serious questions can be raised about whether that is in any way adequate.
And Tia,
and we saw in Missouri, I mean, Crossroads GPS had two ways of donating, money into elections or spending money in elections, and one was through their nonprofit, and one was through their super PAC. And if you wanted to disclose your contribution, if you were a corporate interest or a billionaire, you could pick, one of those two. And if you didn't want to disclose, you could go through the nonprofit, and the money is spent either way, but you can hide your trail. We were sort of stunned when we interviewed Floyd Abrams, who is one of the preeminent First Amendment lawyers who actually defended Citizens United and the group. And in front of the Supreme Court. And we asked him, will corporations one day just be able to donate directly in an unlimited way to candidates? And his answer to that question, which we have in the film, is yes, that the logic of Citizens United, if it were applied to direct contributions, would invalidate those bans and those limitations. And so that's exactly what Abrams said, and I think that spells disaster for democracy.
Well, let me concretize this if I can, or if you need to move on. But
no, you're okay. Go ahead.
The case that is coming up, that's going to be argued next week in McCutcheon, it tests in a very technical way. It tests how much any one person, including now corporations, can give to a candidate. Currently, it is the total aggregation limit would be $48,000, and if this is if the aggregation limit is lifted because of the operation of other rules, the amount would be $3.6 million. And so if any corporation, if you or I wanted to cut a check for $3.6 million, if the Supreme Court rules against the contribution limit, there won't be any problem. There aren't that many people out there who can cut that check.
Right. I do need to take a moment to remind our listeners, this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're talking about the changing role of money in politics. That's the topic of the documentary Citizen Koch, which is showing at next month's Citizen Jane Festival in Columbia. Joining us in studio, Paula Elias is the co-director of the Citizen Jane Film Festival. Joining us by phone, Tia Lessin is the co-director of the film Citizen Koch. And joining us by Skype is Richard Reuben. He's a professor in the MU School of Law. We'd love to hear from you and our audience as well. Do you plan on attending the Citizen Jane Film Festival this year? What films do you plan to see? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet at IntersectKBIA. So, Tia, I had one other question, too. In your film, one of the other subjects we see a lot is a man named Buddy Roemer. Could you tell us a little about him and why you included him in your film?
Yeah, Buddy... sorry.
Okay.
Buddy Roemer is a former governor and U.S. representative from Louisiana. He was a Reagan Democrat when he served in the Congress, but switched parties. In other words, he voted for Reagan, but switched parties in about 20 years ago. And we followed him on the presidential race as he tried to compete for the Republican presidential nomination. He is a banker and committed to taking special interest money out of elections. He was fascinating to us because he was on this sort of quixotic quest to limit his campaign monies to small dollar donations. I think it was a $100 limitation. And he was trying his best to compete with the rest of them that were getting, these millions and tens of millions and into their campaigns. And he was taking this very principled stand on the national stage, but we were sort of captivated with him as a character. He was, he had the political chops to be a contender. He was charming, he was funny, and but ultimately he was outspent and he was drowned out by his opponents. And so it's sort of, we really followed him just trying to not only get on the ballots, but get on the very debate stage that the rest of them were speaking on. And time again he failed, not because he didn't have important things to say, not because his voice wasn't an interesting part of the conversation, or because he was very serious about running, but because he simply hadn't raised enough money to earn the right to be on the debate stage. So we intercut Buddy's journey, or our journey with Buddy throughout the film, because we're trying to remind ourselves and that this is this is happening on the national level as well as happening there in the state of Wisconsin. Okay. This influx of money in politics, determining not only who wins, oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes and most of the time who wins, but who even gets to speak in the first place, and who gets to have their voices amplified. That those choices are predetermined by who gets the big money in their races.
It's the same thing with film. I mean, as everybody's talking, it's so interesting to me that...
And Paula, even sitting here so patiently.
Well,
yes.
No, it's exactly the same thing because, I mean, only 9% of the top 250 grossing films were made by women last year. So that means basically everything you see at the multiplex was directed by a man. Mm-hmm. It's about having a voice, whether it's with politics or influencing culture or, it's really money talks, and it's really what influences, and it's getting worse and worse all the time.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the other roadblocks you run into? I mean, what makes it so difficult, and what could, I guess, free things up a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think it's not so much laws, it's the way people act, and Tia probably has some thoughts on this as well, but I think it's access to resource. It's the good old boys club. It's, we work with who we know. I think there's some sexism there that we tend to trust men more with big budgets. Mm-hmm. I think, you work with who you know, so if it's always been this way, you tend to keep it that way. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's, and documentary is a little bit different. I mean, women are much, much more well represented in documentary, but, don't even get me started on narrative films. It's very difficult, and I think it's about people having a voice and being able to influence how we think and how we vote and the kinds of things we do, and so it's not just politics.
Right. And yeah, Paula, we have a little over a minute left before the break. So what else are we looking forward to this year at Citizen Jane? We're talking a lot about Citizen Koch and this higher brow politics conversation. What else are you looking forward to this year?
And it's a great film, and there are still tickets, so people should definitely get to see the film. We're looking forward to everything. I mean, we actually have double the number of narratives or fiction films of any year in Citizen Jane, so we're really excited about that. We've got comedies, and we've got documentary. We've got our opening night film is incredible. It's Maiden Trip, and it's about 14-year-old Laura Decker who sailed around the world by herself. So it's a big, great weekend full of incredible films. Citizen Koch is one of many, many great films that we're really proud to bring to Columbia.
And you also have a summit coming up, is that right?
We do. The Citizen Jane Summit, that's Thursday from 3 to 7 at the historic Senior Hall on Stevens campus. And basically it came out of, we have these conversations where we're talking about why are women so poorly represented behind and in front of the camera, and what can we do to change it? And these conversations naturally start going towards strategies to try to fix it. And so we finally decided, let's formalize it, and we've got all these amazing thinkers, amazing women, let's bring them all together and start really talking about it. So we have Yvonne Welbin and Julia Reichert and Melissa Silverstein and some graduates from MU School of Journalism, actually, the founders of the Riveter magazine. And then we're going to have just a heavy audience participation, kind of a day where we really talk about how can we make this change. Because I think you see a film like Citizen Koch and you leave just feeling like, oh gosh, I need to do something, and that's how we feel about women in film and being able to have our voice.
Well, we do have to take a short break. I want to remind our listeners this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. Today we're talking about the changing role of money in politics. That's the topic of the documentary Citizen Koch, which is showing at next month's Citizen Jane Film Festival in Columbia. Joining us in studio, Paula Elias is the director of the Citizen Jane Film Festival. Joining us by phone, Tia Lessin is the co-director of the film Citizen Koch. And joining us by Skype is Richard Reuben. He's an MU Law School professor. I'm Ryan Famulner. We'll be right back after a short break.